Ex-cult members, what was your, oh crap, I'm in a cult moment? I started in Primerica in the spring of 2010, and back then Sundays were the days no one worked. That changed to, you should earn your Sundays off. Early on, if you wanted to miss a big event, well, we couldn't force you to go. Eventually, it became, you better go, no excuse. Having outside interests was frowned upon to the point that there was no discussion about them. Primerica was sold to me and I sold it to other people as freedom, but when I left in the summer of 2012, there didn't seem to be any freedom remaining. I felt like there could be no discussion inside the office that wasn't Primerica related, even if you're in the break room eating lunch. I mean, some of us were gathering outside the office, often a building or two away, to talk about something that had nothing to do with Primerica, or to even voice our concerns about the company. Yes, at the place where you work, you may be concerned about complaining about the company inside the building. However, you aren't that concerned about talking about non-work stuff while at lunch in the break room. I had an upline who didn't want us talking about non-work stuff in the office at all. That's not freedom. There was a speaker from out of state who came in to speak to us. There was an upcoming convention, and they spoke of a convention where they maxed out their credit cards to personally rent a bus for their recruits. But they had no recruits, so that was motivation to really start recruiting and have them pay their share for their seat on said bus. So this rippled into our office where we were expected to personally invest more in trips, buses, tickets, hotels, and have our downlines pay us back. When your downline is a part-time waitress who has to save up to take her insurance test, you honestly can't drop on her the news that she's also on the hook for paying you back for her seat and hotel share that you already paid for, and yes, she still has to pay for her tickets. Hey, great news, Rosie. In addition to that licensing test and the money you'll have to pay for your fingerprints in order to get your insurance license, you also need to pay me $50 for your bus seat and your share of the hotel that we, as a group, will be sharing, about $20. And all your food is also on you. In addition, it's $75 for your ticket to this convention, and no, you can't just attend the major events, you are expected to attend a few of the workshops, which are $25 each. And then that also added to the problems I felt. I was licensed, I was making sales, and the company was nickel and diming me every time I turned around. For major events, I had to buy no less than 5 tickets, not the convention, but every 3-month event, and have my recruits buy them from me as well as sell them when recruiting new people. To start making this money, you need to give me a list of 100 people and their phone numbers as well as $100. Also, we have a big event next month and attendance is compliant and that's $20. Please, if you have $100, then you have $120. You don't have to pay me for the ticket now, just make some minor cuts over the week and you'll have $20 for this life-changing event ticket. Yeah, I felt dirty saying stuff like that. There was also the fact that I had to pay a subscription for the online tool used to sell the policies to families and additional materials, like pamphlets and such, also had to be paid for by me. I have worked in sales before and I've expected to pay for sales tools, but having to constantly police what I talk about and seeing my commission checks drained by the very company that I'm selling for. Think about that episode of The Boondocks where the little girl wanted to buy a pony. So she sells lemonade and some rich guy makes her a deal where he will help her get her pony via that lemonade stand. But eventually it's clear that he screwed her over and she had to pay for all supplies and send her money to him, where she was actually losing money while he made all the money even though he did no work and no financial investment, just collecting the money. That is almost how Primerica felt when I left. These weird stuff are also from my time there. Big events with clapping, music, and doing things like the wave prevents thinking and conversation and encourages conforming. Several speeches from my upline about how we shouldn't spend our time with people who don't want to be part of the company, including family and lifelong friends. Planning on moving into the same community together that was referred to as the Primerica Estates. Parents had a Halloween party planned the same night as my Primerica office's Halloween party. I was called out for picking family over company. We traveled to events out of state. It was frowned upon for us to travel on our own. They wanted us to go on a bus or van together. The idea that someone would be happier doing something other than Primerica? Comical. Surgeons, lawyers, military officers, and scientists would all be better off joining Primerica and giving up their jobs. Doing something that wasn't Primerica related, you better be ready to explain yourself. One guy got called out in front of the office for going to his grandmother's 80th birthday party. I went out of state with my then wife to celebrate our anniversary, which required me to explain to those running the office about my actual dedication to the company, even though I was only gone for one weekend. I even had to explain myself when I stayed home one Sunday to replace the brakes on my car. I was asked, "How is that going to improve your business?" My answer was, I have to drive to people's homes to sell policies. I shouldn't have to explain how car maintenance is a business related thing. Hobbies had to almost be company approved. If you're reading a book, it better be one to improve your business. Have a hobby that doesn't have any relation to Primerica? Drop it and focus more on Primerica. Sell your television if it's a distraction from your business. And when it came to getting to the company event in Georgia, we were told that getting there was our highest priority. Selling anything you can if you can't afford to go. Tickets alone were over $100, including televisions, video game consoles, computers, and so on and so forth. Kids weren't safe either. Those members who were dedicated 100% to the company brought their kids to the office on nights and weekends. I saw kids the day after Christmas with some of their new toys playing at a table in our break room fighting off boredom. One pair of parents had a kid who got a laser tag birthday party invite. That was the same day as one of the big dull events where higher-ups from out of state came in to speak to us in long, dull speeches. The parents told their kid, nearly in tears as we were in line to enter the event room, that going to this event was more important than playing laser tag. He can't be a kid. He has to follow this as what he will do for his lifelong career. Okay, well, I learned today about Primerica and to avoid it and all the people who religiously talk about it. And we all know the type that fall for all those MLMs, those multi-level marketing thingies too, right? You know one. And I'm willing to bet that you keep them at arm's length too. For good reason, of course. They can get super annoying. Story 2. My father stopped going to the Creation Museum's church after he approached the pastor and asked why he and my brother were not allowed to have communion. The pastor told him, I understand your concern, but we feel that since we don't know how good of a Christian you are, you and your son shouldn't be allowed to partake in communion as it may affect innocence with your sins. They also demanded a huge amount of tithe and insisted at the time that any church other than theirs may not always be true Christians, and that going to churches other than theirs was wrong. They also insisted that people attending the church should also visit the Creation Museum, and if you questioned anything in the museum, it was sinful. They also told my dad and brother that unbaptized children shouldn't be near baptized children, presumably for the same reason. We were just talking about it the night before last, and my father said, I swear to you, that's a cult in the making. I haven't been there since. Also, my cousin was involved in the Mars Hill Church in Seattle. He was involved with a girl for over 2 years, planning on marrying her, etc. Eventually, they decided to be together. This is outrageously frowned upon at Mars Hill, and afterward, the girl went to the Mars Hill pastor and told him that she and my cousin had had relations out of wedlock. Cue Mars Hill pastor bringing my cousin to the front of the church in front of the entire church body and telling him he'd go to hell, etc. The girl was forbidden from ever even being in the same room as my cousin and has refused to speak to him since. My cousin tried to defend himself, and they started publicly and privately tormenting him, with people even going so far as to approach him in public places like coffee shops and grocery stores. Eventually, Mars Hill did a public apology to my cousin, and my cousin left the country entirely and now lives in Australia as a raging individual dating a girl nobody in our entire family likes. Our aunt and uncle, who he had been staying with in Seattle at the time, are prominent figures in Seattle, and while my aunt is Buddhist, my uncle occasionally visits Mars Hill. They tried to get the pastor to apologize more appropriately, but he refused, telling my uncle it didn't matter anymore because my cousin made his choice. A couple years later, pastor and his wife had a sleep-in or whatever, where they spent all day in bed on the roof of the church to display how a truly loving couple should be, and my aunt and uncle were pretty mad. I swear, Mars Hill is a cult and that pastor is the crappiest person in Seattle. I can guarantee God disapproves of him. Story 3. It was a summer during middle school when a friend of a friend invited us to a camp that lasted a week. It has so much awesome stuff like paintball, four-wheeling, and swimming on the lake. It sounded great, so I went. And it was an ultra-religious camp. We had to give our phones up when we got there. The first hour of the day was spent praying. Then a 30-minute breakfast was followed by another hour of praying. Then 2 hours of alone time where you couldn't go back to your rooms or do anything other than sit and talk to Jesus and God. Then another hour of praying. Then a 30-minute lunch, then a 30-minute prayer. Then I have a good 4 to 5 hours of free time to do all those activities. Then another hour of prayer, then a 30-minute dinner, then a prayer. Then we go back to our rooms to talk to our assigned counselor, who led us in evening prayer. I'm not saying that this place was a cult, but I had my thoughts when they led us on a march to a big fire and made us lay down in a massive field. staring at the stars while they chanted prayers over a microphone one night that week. Another thing that I vividly remember is that when we were lying down in the field, they began to hand off the microphone to people who had anything they wanted to share. One girl began to talk about how she and a few of her friends were asking each other, "What if humans are actually just robots?" She got so worked up over it that she began to cry into the mic. Another vivid memory was laying down in our bunks late at night and talking about how the universe came to be. I mentioned the Big Bang Theory, and they all began to agree unanimously on how stupid that theory is and that there was no way that happened. Right, but a big dude in the sky made it, so that makes way more sense. I would have been fooled too if someone invited me over to quote unquote camp, but that certainly ain't no camp unless you want to know how to be a robot that prays? Yeah, no. Now, I haven't witnessed these situations in real life, but oh boy, these are some jaw-dropping stories. Makes you think about people, huh? If you're enjoying the content, consider hitting the like and subscribe buttons if you haven't already before we dive into the next story because it super does help me out. Story 4. Once I was invited to a supposed Christian youth meeting by my cousin. I didn't really want to go, but she insisted, so I ended up there. It was held in a small apartment, and when we arrived, we were greeted by the group leaders who seemed like totally normal young people. Afterwards, the other members arrived and they turned off all the lights in the apartment. I thought that was a little weird, but no big deal. Then they started with the music. They put on those Christian rock songs they usually use in normal Christian youth groups. But they started dancing, jumping everywhere, flailing their arms, and weirdest of all, laughing uncontrollably. Then in 1 second, they all threw themselves to the ground, got on their knees, and started crying. After this, they got up and started dancing and laughing again as if nothing had ever happened. I was seriously creeped out at this point, but this was only the beginning. They started with this weird ritual where they promised to perform any miracle you wanted or needed as Christ allowed them to do so. A kid said he wanted to get taller, and so they put their hands all over him and started murmuring prayers for a while. Then they put him against a wall and they claimed he had at least grown 3 centimeters. He believed them, like seriously believed them. Later they claimed they could turn water into wine and grab the bottle of water, put their hands on top of it and prayed again. The water didn't change at all, but they all drank from it, claimed it tasted like wine, and claimed they were getting tipsy from it while laughing hysterically again. Finally, the quote-unquote reunion ended and they continued being as normal as they were before, as if nothing had happened. I left, and when they tried to contact me again, I just ignored them. Story 5. I was accidentally in a religious cult. I would see how the pastor would treat non-members and members that didn't comply with what he wanted, and I would think, I hope he doesn't start acting this way towards me. He would torment people, gossip, expect us to stay at his house until late hours, forbid us to hang out with non-members, and he even asked me to move in there when I already had my own place. I noticed it was a cult when I told them I was hanging out with an old friend, and they proceeded to ask why I was doing that and that they were my friends. I came to a service the following Sunday, and the pastor saw me and said, I had a message I was going to preach, but I'm going to preach a different message today. The whole service was pretty much him talking crap about me and making rude jokes. I knew this sermon was about me when he kept referencing the person hanging out with other people and saying it was sinful and of the world. I never felt so embarrassed in my life with everyone laughing at me. I sat through that entire service just embarrassed. Once I left, several of the members attempted to contact me, with a few of them trying to go to the movies with me at midnight when they knew damn well the closest movie theater was an hour away. And what movie theater shows movies at midnight? After I stopped going to that church, a few of the members completely stopped talking to me despite us being quote-unquote friends. I still can't believe that happened to me. And here's a story with a lesson on friendship. Real friends don't tell you who to be friends with. Fake friends try to trick you into going into the movies with them at midnight. Story 6. At a young age, I realized something was wrong. I didn't know what at the time, but something just didn't sit well with me about our church. I think it was my parents filling my head with nonsense about resurrection and eternal life, and then turning around and saying it wouldn't apply to my dog. Still, I couldn't reconcile that what I was being told was BS, as it was coming from my parents whom I idolized. I was just too young to realize that my parents could be wrong about a given subject, or worse, could lie to me. So I accepted it because, come on, I'm a kid, where am I gonna go? What spawned my waking up, as it were, was a chain of realizations started by a school acquaintance of mine. He was flamboyant, but he was never unkind or untoward in any way, not at all like the monster I was told that specific community was. So it forced me to answer that question: is what I'm seeing true, or is what I've been told true? And the answer was the former, so that called into question the legitimacy of the cult and everything it had ever taught me. Unfortunately, I realized as well what consequences would be before me if I spoke up about my thoughts on the matter. I decided to wait until an upcoming event, the centennial of the ending of Gentile times, to make my choice. It wouldn't take nearly that long to do so. Nothing, and I mean nothing, in this world can prepare you for the sense of mortal dread and fear that being trapped in a cult can instill in you, especially if you experience mental health issues like I do. Thankfully, in about mid 2014, I found my way to a little support group for people like me who were raised as or became Jehovah's Witnesses. That place saved my life. They taught me the truth about the truth, the reality of what the Jehovah's Witnesses actually were, and what I needed to do to get out. Story 7. I wasn't in a cult, I accidentally made one in 4th grade. Okay, so this may sound weird, but I accidentally started a cult in 4th grade. Note that it was dumb since I was a kid, but it counts. So, like the jerk I am, I decided to worship a tree to mess with people. After some time, all my friends started worshiping it too. Since the tree was in the playground, most people saw it, except the teachers, since we were behind the jungle gym. Eventually, people I didn't talk to started worshiping. It was mid-October and about 30 people were worshiping the tree. There were 2,000 kids, so it was a large field and we were a small group. We also had 3rd to 8th grade out in recess with the middle school and lunch before us while we were outside. Then the tree was now called the Creator, pretty much God. It was December and the whole 4th grade, about 50 people, were now in the cult, but this is where it got more weird. For some reason, my school left the park open during winter break and spring break, and people left notes, cards, and even some drawings taped to the tree. Most fell, though, and the janitor had to throw them away. The principal even had to make a notice to not put stuff on the tree during winter break. And every day, someone would always put something on there, and a few people even got detention. Now, the cult was out of my control, and about 20 people would actively worship in 4th and 5th grade, but people would leave many more notes than 40, so there must have been a decent amount ever. During spring break, they left the park closed, but somehow people got some notes in, and I think they got detention, but I have no idea. At the end of the year, the cult was gone. I wonder what the staff thought. Now, this is the best one because OP wasn't even trying to make a cult. Prankster or natural-born leader, he must have been quite the remarkable 4th grader. Story 8. When an assistant youth minister at my family's Fundamentalist church, Church of Christ, separatist, who had been struggling to have a child with his wife for several years, was finally able to conceive, he was so happy he wrote a song thanking God for his blessing of a daughter-to-be. He played it for us on his guitar in the back of his pickup in the parking lot before service began. When the elders of the church heard that he had played an instrument on church grounds, they excommunicated him and ordered him to never return to the property on pain of trespassing. This was a denomination that taught specifically that attendance at church within the denomination was mandatory to enter heaven. Essentially, they'd sentenced a good man to hell for the act of thanking God for his child. I asked my grandfather why they had done that, and he told me that the church forbade instruments because they were not permitted in the Bible. I pointed out that the harp and lyre were mentioned in 2 Samuel and Chronicles, and that several of the Psalms were specifically composed for the harp, lyre, and trumpet. He replied that there were no instruments in the New Testament, and that the New Testament superseded the Old Testament, so anything not permitted in it was disallowed in the church. When I responded that by that logic we should not be permitted to wear pants to church, as the New Testament makes no mention of pants, he flew into a rage and did not speak to me for some time. I stopped attending the church the following Sunday. Story 9. I had an accident when I was young that affected my back. Sitting hurts. I convinced my mother to allow me to walk during the multi-hour-long services in the library overflow room downstairs that had a speaker blaring whatever was going on at the pulpit. In that library were all the original cult publications from 80-plus years prior. No one ever paid any attention to them, but I was a voracious reader. They were into some wackadoo stuff at the beginning that totally contradicted the current teachings. Pyramid power, numerology, etc. I never said anything because it was a closed society and questioning meant total shunning, but from that point on, I was aware that it was all garbage and I spent most of my time planning my escape. When I finally publicly called BS 6 years later, I lost everyone and everything. Life sucked for a while, but I would do it again. Thanks for joining me on these eye-opening cult stories, but honestly, these have only scratched the surface. So if you're up for more harrowing tales from people born into such beliefs, click on the next video. Children born into cults, what moment made you leave? Story 3 is insane. I'm glad they got out. I'll see you there, and thank you for watching this one.